Hello, this is Taylor Elwood with the Pagan Pride Workshop Coordinator for Eugene Pagan Pride, which is coming up on August 6th, 2023. And I'm here with Shane Nelson, who is one of our presenters. Shane, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you and who you are.
Yeah, I'm Shane Nelson. My workshop this time is focusing on identifying and communicating your own theology.
Mhm.
In the community, I am a licensed professional counselor specializing in trauma and addiction. In the clinical hospital setting, I'm a board certified chaplain, and I'm currently working on doctor's my doctorate in ministry and interreligious chaplaincy.
Oh, excellent. So, what does it mean to develop a personal theology? That word theology,
Yeah.
typically when we hear that word, it can be a fairly loaded word. So what does that mean in relationship to paganism?
Uh, for most pagans, we have a personal gnosis.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, that means that a lot of times we don't have the language to communicate with our peers from other traditions. So being able to break it down into thoughts of like, what is theology? Is it a personal theology? Is it a doctrinal theology? And how does that really guide the way we approach and practice so that we have language around why our approach is different and valid?
Okay, excellent. And so you're gonna be teaching this class at Pagan Pride, and aside from learning how to develop a theology, is there any other takeaways that people can look forward to or can anticipate?
This one in particular is just developing that language to be able to have that interreligious dialogue.
Hmm.
But other ones that I'm working on right now are things like trauma informed spiritual care from a pagan perspective. And then last year, I focused on what the professional requirements for chaplaincy are and how to meet those as a pagan.
Excellent. And those are very important things. When did you become a pagan, and what helped you decide to become a pagan? What was your journey like?
A little bit all over the place.
Isn't it all for all of us?
Well, when I was very little, so 2 or 3 years old, I spent a lot of time at the neighbor's house who was like a quarter mile away because I was out in the middle of nowhere. And the neighbor would walk around and talk to me about the land spirits, Mother Earth, and Father Sky. And that was really the first introduction to nature centered spirituality that I had. So later, when I ended up in foster care and all the families I lived with were Protestant, I had a lot of questions that didn't reconcile with that approach. And every time I would ask those questions, I'd be asked not to come back to the church
Oh boy.
at like 5, 6, 7 years old. And that went on until I graduated high school. Um, I really started exploring paganism towards the end of my sophomore year, but because of the very fundamental nature of the Southern Baptist family I was living with, it was whatever brief pamphlets I could find and hide so that I wouldn't get caught with them. And then I've been practicing ever since. Um, I started working as a lay leader for the military, providing pagan services both in the US and overseas starting in like '06. Now, well, the last 3 or 4 years, I was the director of military affairs, sponsoring and supporting 19 services in the US and overseas. And now I'm the executive director of Sacred Well Congregation, whose primary focus is serving military pagans.
First of all, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
And I think that it sounds like a very interesting journey. I mean, I kind of had a similar experience growing up. I would go to church and I would have questions, and they'd be like, "Well, all the answers are in this one book." And I'm like, "But that book isn't giving me all the answer. It isn't giving me all the answers." And then they'd be like, "Don't come back." I'd be like, "Well, okay."
Exactly. Either that or they sit you right next to the podium.
Mhm.
You're not allowed to be in the pews. You have to be right next to the podium where they can keep an eye on you.
Yeah. So some of the work it sounds like that you do, you kind of mentioned it earlier, is interreligion dialogue. Why is that important? And I think it is important, but
Yeah.
why is it important in your own perspective as to around that?
So chaplaincy specifically requires pluralism.
Hmm.
So if I'm in the hospital, I might see 2 or 3 pagan identifying patients in a week, but I might have 15 to 20 requests for visits that week. Most of them are Protestant, some are Taoist or Muslim or Hindu. So I have to be able to navigate that relationship and that conversation in between to support them effectively. The other part of that interreligious dialogue is when we come into community events like the Parliament of World Religions, there are a lot of people from a lot of different traditions that don't all speak the same language as far as spirituality. So we have to be able to find that common ground to be able to talk about the similarities, but also recognize the differences and go from there.
Thank you. And what final question? What makes you proud to be a pagan?
Mm. I
Especially
haven't
since
really
we're
thought
dealing with
about it
pagan pride.
as, yeah, I haven't really thought about it as being proud of being pagan as much as holding a line,
Hmm.
because that nature centered connection has always been a part of my path. So it wasn't necessarily drawing on pride as much as holding space for others to be able to practice in a way that they feel comfortable and appropriate.
Yeah, that makes
And I
sense to
think
me.
the action itself is where I find the pride.
I can relate to that. I think, I've been public pretty much from the beginning with my name. And so I think not everyone has that luxury or can make that choice, but it's certainly been something I've made for similar reasons. So I think it is really important. Well, I'm really excited to see your workshop on Pagan Pride, which will be on August 6th, coming up at the Alton Baker Park in Eugene. So for those of you who are watching this video, please make sure you come check out Shane's workshop, check out all the other workshops, and we look forward to seeing you there.
And anybody who has questions, I'm going to have a table too, so people can come by and ask questions as they come up.
Excellent. Yeah. So you have a table there too. Perfect. So that's great. And that's a great opportunity to learn more about what Shane does and also being able to ask some of those questions. And that's really important. All right. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you, Taylor.